on Teams. Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. Today is December 9th. If you haven't done your Christmas shopping like me, you better get moving. Although I've done a few, so I'm not completely done. Today we'll be recording episode number 405, and we're going to be talking about Azure Active Directory. And earlier in the year, they announced that they were going to 4 nines. And we've got Nadim Abdo he's the CVP for engineering for Azure Active Directory to talk about it. So he's heavily involved in doing this. So, but before we get to Nadim, Sajid, let's talk about some news.
Yeah, I've got 3 items here today on the list. And the first is regarding accessing Azure storage securely. Typically you can configure service endpoint in Azure storage so that you can have specific subnets or VNets connect into it securely. But in the past, you could own those subnets, and VNets had to be in the same region or a paired region from that storage. This new feature, which is currently in public preview, lets you access it from any region. So now, you could have your properties all over the world still accessing the same storage account very securely using that service endpoint feature. So I think this, given our theme of making things geo-redundant and more resilient, I think this will fall into that category. The second one is about immutable storage. I think we talked about this a while ago, where, blob storage has a feature called immutable storage, where if you make an update, it's write once and then read many. So it can never be changed or modified or deleted. For compliance, in scenarios where you need compliance, where legally you have to hold something for so many years. This is a free feature. It's essentially free. You just pay for the storage cost. There's no additional cost to it. And it was previously in public preview. And now this feature is generally available. So if you need to, to kind of add documents or something and store them for X number of years, knowing that they'll never go away, this is a very nice feature to use. And finally, Evan, this is the one that maybe you have used, which is being able to take snapshots of virtual machines.
I saw that. Nice I need to go check that out. Yeah, that looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a very cool feature where, you have a machine that's running and you feel like, it's running really well, and you want to be able to go back to that at some point, no matter what happened to that VM. You can do this restore point, and we're used to that term in the Windows world, but this applies to all VMs, where you can take a restore point. It'll take all the configuration, the exact snapshots of all the disks, and save it away, right? Tuck it away. Anytime later you need to get back to it, you can just go back to that restore point, and it'll just continue from there as if nothing happened. So this is a cool feature, I think, for admins who want to make sure they can go back to a well-known running system.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the holy grail in terms of troubleshooting sometimes, right? Let me just go back to where I was previously. So the two that I want to talk about today is, one is the public preview of this run command. So basically this is, if I want to go execute a script against a whole bunch of virtual machines or VM scale sets, I can now go run, some PowerShell or some shell scripts against it. So super handy for managing these machines. And then the other one, this one, I'll confess, I'm not a developer much these days, and I don't have anything to do with maps, but I just thought this was so cool. For Azure Maps, we just announced, historical weather, air quality, and tropical storms based on geography. I just feel like I should go play with that data because it just feels cool, right? It's one of those neat things. I have absolutely no business justification for doing it. Well, great. So Nadim, thanks for coming on. Do me a favor, could you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you do here at Microsoft?
Yeah, absolutely, Evan. Thank you. So I'm Nadim Abdo. I'm CVP of Engineering for Azure Active Directory. And what that means is my team is the team that both builds and runs the service. And so we run actually all of the identity systems for the company, including obviously AAD, the B2E system there, the B2C system, and all the B2B capabilities. And we also run the MSA system, which is the consumer identity system. And they both actually share a lot of infrastructure. They share the same developer experiences, the same SDKs, and they're all built in one team.
So this is actually, I had reached out to you when you guys announced this, because usually, you and I don't tend to run into each other in happy places just based on what I do for a living. But this was really cool to see you guys. You guys were running 99.9 previously. You've done a ton of engineering work over the last couple of years to get to 99.99. Like, what does it take to get there? Like, what did y'all have to do? What were you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's an enormous amount of investment. And actually, I should start with saying that our number one focus is the resilience and security of the service. We know that our customers treat it as an absolutely mission critical service, and everything in the cloud depends on identity. And so commensurate with that, we have an enormous focus and continued investment in continually raising the bar. So we're excited that we got to make the announcement that we publicly raised the SLA. Obviously, our internal targets always are ahead of the external targets, but that's come as a result of enormous number of changes that we've driven in the system. And I'm happy to talk about some of the major ones here just to give a flavor of them. But I'd say that it's something the team cares passionately about, is helping our customers stay productive and resilient. And we continually drive up the resilience characteristics based on what we're learning, and a ton of telemetry as well, looking at the health of scenarios and metrics that customers are experiencing. So should I talk about some of the examples of the types of investments that we've made?
Yeah, that would be great. I think you mentioned earlier something about cells. What does a cell have to do with resiliency?
With resilience, yeah. So the way that I like to describe it is by analogy. Is if you think of a ship or a submarine that is separated into compartments that are independent in their ability to flood, and if one does flood, it can't affect another one. And even more importantly, that the overall ship is not impaired even if there's damage to one particular area of the ship. And so we talk about that concept when we talk about cells, which are really what we call internally, another term for them is fault domains. And they are fault domains that isolate many classes of failures to not be able to spread beyond that fault domain. And so the benefit is, if you have a tight fault domain, then A, you're isolated from a lot of other failures, and B, the maximum blast radius of a particular type of failure is contained to that. And so our goal obviously is to prevent failures from happening in the first place. And we do that through a variety of techniques. But if the worst were to happen and there is a failure, our objective is that it is as localized as possible in this dimension, and that we can recover from it as rapidly as possible. So think of it as like a two-dimensional area thing, and our goal is constantly to squeeze that as much as possible, to limit the scope of failures to almost zero if we can, and if not, as small as possible. And if there ever is an issue, to be able to reduce it. And if you can do that, then in the totality of the space, then even if you do have an issue, it's localized. And so the cell change, what it did is, maybe 3 years ago, Azure AD was running in effectively what would be 5 fault domains. They weren't called cells at the time, but what it meant is many classes of failures could spread to up to 20% of the capacity serving our customers. And that's obviously very, very large. We've fundamentally re-architected the service in flight while it's scaling and supporting many hundreds of millions of users and close to 100 billion authentications per day. So it's not an easy thing to do, to change. It is actually the world's largest commercial identity system as well. I'll say that. So changing the jet engines while the jet is in flight, certainly a difficult engineering challenge. But we've changed it to 107 cells today. And that means that no cell has more than about 2% of the entire traffic in the system in that cell. And we're continually raising the bar in terms of how well separated these cells are from each other. And so we're constantly learning if there's something that potentially can be a correlation factor between one cell and another, and looking to separate it and isolate it completely. And so that investment is a structural change, an architectural change that we've made in the system that has enabled us to take a particular class of failures and say they can't spread. And that's an element of many that has gone into the resilience work that we've done on Azure AD itself. There are many other things. For example, many outages are caused by change. And like many services in Azure, we have an absolute mandate that all of our changes are propagated to the service in a mechanism we call safe deployment. And so that is a set of rules and a set of technologies that mandates that changes can never flow out fast across the system. In fact, they take up to a week to propagate, and they don't propagate until they get validated first by tests. So we do a ton of testing internally, including we do something that is pretty interesting is we take all of the production traffic that we have and we take a slice of it from every customer and we fork it and we apply it to our new changes before the customer sees it. And that allows us to test the total set of scenarios that our customers are putting the service through in a way that is not destructive, but allows us to validate that the new changes we're rolling out will work with your configurations and your policies. And that all happens in our labs, in our internal, we call them canary stages of the deployment rings within Azure, before any customer real production traffic is actually even seeing the changes. And only once it passes those steps does it then go to a very small set of what we call test traffic, and only then progresses in increasingly concentric circles, first within Microsoft itself, so our own team, certainly my team, but Evan and others on this call are among the first in the world to get new changes exposed to them. And at any step, if the health signals of the telemetry indicates that there's a problem, the system will roll it back, will stop, and will prevent that change that might be causing an issue from propagating. And we're constantly innovating on how we can detect more and more classes of failures. So it's not just like, hey, the service is completely not functioning, but even gray failures, like an authentication is a bit slower than it should be, or a particular scenario is not behaving quite as it did before. And that's where there's a constant investment in raising of the bar. Like our work there is never done, but we're working now across Microsoft. So it's not just is identity working, but is a compound scenario like accessing a SharePoint document from Teams, using a conditional access rule. Are all of those things connected together, all working, and being able to detect them at scale if they're not, and if a change has caused that problem, to stop the change and roll it back. And so you can see here that this is a journey. It's not a you do it once. It's a continual evolution and raising of that bar. But the combination of cells as well as a very strict enforcement of safe deployment policies across all of our changes, we've made a lot of progress, and watching our telemetry and our metrics on health is what has enabled us to say that we're comfortable to raise the public SLA as well. And so we did that earlier this year.
Yeah, great. Cynthia?
So Nadim, I'm curious. I think it's awesome that we're able to raise to 4 nines, but Microsoft, as one of the consumers, as AD as well, how do we build our own resiliency when that 1 minus 4 nines happen, unfortunately?
Yeah, great question, Cynthia. So we take a layered view, right? It's like you build layers and layers of defenses, and if anything fails, there's another layer to catch you and protect you. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that we've done that is very, very, very hard to do, and I would say that not lightly, which is to build a twin of the system that is a backup. And you can think of this like a UPS or a generator for a critical facility like a hospital to back up the power supply, the power grid. And so the power grid obviously is engineered to very, very high standards. But if you have an application that is so mission critical, then you invest in that secondary, complete separate backup. Airplanes use multiple computers that are written in different programming languages, different operating systems, and they all have to agree and vote, again, because the application is so mission critical. But you can see how the cost, and I don't mean just the dollar expense, but just the investment needed to build a twin for something as large and complex as the world's largest identity system is a massive undertaking. But given the mission criticality, that is what we've done. And we now have what we call the Azure AD backup authentication system running in production and protecting every customer's traffic. Currently, what we have protected is the scenarios that are driven by desktop and mobile applications. And that's both for applications that connect to Microsoft resources like Teams and SharePoint and Exchange, but even your third-party apps that use open standards like OIDC and our MSOL libraries, they're protected too. And we are working to expand that with high urgency to also protect web scenarios. And that's starting to roll out in the next few months, like within the early part of the next calendar year. And our goal there is, again, that all of the other defenses are designed to limit the scope of outages, to prevent them in the first place, ideally, to make them as small and as short as possible. But if the worst happens, that the backup auth system seamlessly and transparently kicks in. And when I say that, it's transparent in that it's completely automatic to you as a customer. You don't have to do anything. Your users won't see any different experience. That's actually really key. And then even more important, your security policies are completely respected. And so you don't have to do anything special, and you don't have to make a dual set of configurations and keep two different systems up to date. We just handle all of that for you, and it's included for every customer. For customers that do want to override and make certain choices on top, we do actually offer a capability now that's rolling out as part of conditional access called resilient defaults, where if you have a particular application where the way that you want to set the trade-off is that you want to respect a particular policy's timeliness, even over an availability issue, you get to take that choice. But we make choices by default that we feel are a good balance of resilience and respect security policies for every customer, but we give you the control to make an override if it's important to you for a particular use case.
So I think, Nadim, you may have just answered my question, because that was, as an application developer, I was wondering, if I'm using something like MSAL to authenticate, to get OAuth tokens and whatnot from Azure AD, is there anything, is there something I need to do to avail of this? And B, what are the additional things I could do, maybe in terms of retry or, any other policies that I can put in my application to make it, I guess, even more resilient, if that's even possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And so our strategy there is to bake in all of the resilience capabilities as out-of-the-box automatic things that if you use our latest SDK, which, as you mentioned, is MSAL, or Microsoft Authentication Library, you will get these capabilities for free. That means it's aware of the backup auth system. It has smart retry behavior that correctly handles situations where the server may be under load. It has actually a capability called proactive token renewal, which means that it will, even before your token expires, start trying to renew it proactively. And that means that you have a longer effective life for your token, so that, again, if there ever is an issue where the service is unreachable or unavailable, you're insulated from that because your token is preemptively refreshed for you. And we actually have a set of guidance and documentation, public documentation, that we can link to in the comments for this video, in this talk, that points you to all of the documentation materials on the best resilience practices for developers, as well as for IT administrators, for policies that you might choose to set that are the best way to configure your environment and your system to get the maximal resilience benefits possible.
I want to loop back around, because I think you said something in there that was super key around the resilience. Like, you talked about work we've done on the service, right, to do that, and you've talked about the authentication libraries and that all this is baked in. But I think I just want to make sure the audience caught that you do need to upgrade your SDK to pick up some of this stuff that's on the client. Is that, I mean, I assume that you're continuing to invest in resiliency on these clients, and so if I'm an owner of an app, I should probably build into my engineering plan every, I don't know, quarter or something, some sort of cycle to always pick up the new SDK. I don't want to just sit on the old one, because then all I have is whatever we knew at that day and not the latest and greatest.
Yeah, that's right. And if you are using the MSOL SDK, we do make regular improvements to it in terms of reliability, in terms of security. And given it is such a critical component, it's absolutely a very good idea to stay current on it. And we know that updating SDKs is a burden. And so we make it as easy as possible to we don't introduce breaking changes unless we absolutely have to. In our documentation, we have lots of guidance and support for how to migrate from older versions like the ADAL library to the MSOL library. Our engineering team is actually monitoring and supporting forums, GitHub and Stack Overflow and others. And so if anyone is needing help, we're there to support you with that. But absolutely, it's a very good idea to update and use the latest SDKs. The other thing that I'll mention is where there are places where the platform itself can take care of things for you, we actually do that on your behalf. And so, for example, if you use managed identities, which is a key part of Azure in terms of the identity that resources like VMs use to communicate to systems like storage or other things, we've actually baked in a lot of these resilience capabilities directly into managed identity itself. And so managed identities is now supported by a flavor of the backup authentication system where every region maintains an authentication endpoint and cache. And you don't need to do anything. Just by using managed identity, you are using a completely regionalized system that has a layer of defense and cache if the primary Azure AD goes down.
Nadim, I work with a number of customers to help them build geo-redundant systems, right? Financial services customers, especially who need to be running all the time. One of the challenges has been is we just don't know how the system will react, in case we get that very, very rare situation where there's a problem accessing Azure AD, right? Like there's no way to force that to happen in a controlled environment to say, okay, what's going to happen, right? Am I going to get this error message? Is that going to go fail? Do I need to fix that, right? So, and unfortunately, until it's too late, you don't know, when it actually happens, then you're like, oh, I should have done that, right? One of the things that I had worked with the Azure Chaos Studio team to see, hey, is there a way to introduce chaos into accessing Azure AD? Because that would be a good way for us to validate that in a pre-production or in a non-production environment, and just say, oh yeah, this is what happens. SQL Server falls over. This happens. We need to do this. We need to do that. Okay, and then boom, right? Then you're in a much better place because you plan for that eventuality, that 0.0001% that may happen in the future.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sujit, and I will share that to validate a lot of these changes, we use those capabilities internally. Absolutely. So we use Chaos Studio, and there's capabilities that we have that we're working on that we don't yet have fully rolled out that are integrated into the public version of Chaos Studio. But I can share that the way that we internally operate is we run regular drills where we take out portions of Azure AD in production and use that to exercise that the system itself is healthy and able to tolerate those outages. And that goes all the way to regular drills where we take out entire data centers and Azure AD seamlessly fails over. Your point is absolutely an interesting and great one, and one that we'll look at how we can integrate into our plans to make available to customers as well the ability to, in your environment, simulate an Azure AD failure and make sure that your apps are resilient. And so that's a great one, and we'll take that in the backlog.
And when the feature ships, you can say, "So G told us to do this." So this is.
We'll get all the credit.
Yeah. No, this is great, Nadim. I mean, it's really awesome to see the progression that y'all are doing, and I really, as somebody who lives in the reliability world, and generally people only most of the time only talk to me when something's broken. I love the idea of baking this stuff into the platform itself, the service itself, as well as the libraries. Is there anything else you really recommend? We talked about chaos stuff. We talked about, upgrading the SDK and this investment job. Anything else that any other sort of thing you want to leave in our listeners' mind about, hey, don't forget X in their thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the calls to action, it's really the awareness around that link that I shared about how you can make your applications most resilient. Since you asked if there's anything else, though, I do have one more thing. One more thing that I'd like to share that is a resilience and security investment that we're very excited about. That is called continuous access evaluation, and that's an investment that we've just released, and it's being integrated in more and more workloads across Microsoft. What it does is it fundamentally enhances the model. The way that the identity systems used to work, including Azure AD, but many other open standard identity systems, is that applications would have to periodically go to the identity system to refresh tokens. And they would do that so that the identity system would have the opportunity to evaluate the security policies and make sure that the user is still entitled to the access that they have. And so, for example, if an administrator changes a user's role or removes them from a group, or an employee leaves a company, that token refresh is where that change gets manifested. What it meant, though, is that you have applications periodically requesting updates from the identity provider, and they would do this typically at an hourly cadence, and that meant that your token lifetime was about an hour. And what that does is it means that you are now exposed to potential unavailability of whatever the identity provider is every hour, and that if it's not available, then you can't get a token and your workflow can't proceed. What continuous access evaluation does is it's almost like you don't want to make a trade-off on security, and it actually introduces the best of both worlds. It actually improves security because it moves away from this polling model of having to go request updates every hour to an instant event model, where Azure AD is now able to send signals instantly when a policy change happens to the workloads that are receiving the tokens. And they're able to make policy changes within seconds instead of every hour. And when you can do that, you're actually able to then safely and securely increase the token lifetime. And so you get a dual benefit. You get better security because you have instant enforcement, and you get a longer token lifetime, which, coupled with things like the proactive token renewal in the library, means that, again, if all else fails and there's an availability issue in Azure AD, your app is unaffected. Because if you don't need to go request a token, if you have a live token, it continues to work. And hopefully that unavailability, again, since we're compressing it in time, is momentary, even if it does happen, and hopefully it doesn't. And your application, though, will not even see it. And so that's a really, really important investment that we've made as well. And we're doing it in ways that are open standards. We're contributing back to the standards bodies. We're working with the industry on that. But definitely adoption of our latest SDKs is a way to get continuous access evaluation in your applications as well. And so that's another reason, another plug to go look at that guidance and make sure that you're adopting the latest libraries.
This seems cheating.
I have to
I get
applaud
it.
that. Sorry. No,
go
I have
ahead,
to
Sajid.
applaud that one. That is an amazing update. Very nice. Thank you.
It does seem a little bit like cheating. I get longer lifetimes. I get better access or better control of my access. Like it's awesome to be able to not have to pick one, right? Because that was sort of always the challenge you had before, right? Was I go back all the time, and then now I'm really relying on it, or I now have this window, right? That it's somebody got fired and they have the, hour or whatever that they could go do something malicious. Now we're cutting that down. No, that's awesome, especially in today's world where the edge doesn't really exist anymore.
That's
right?
right.
I mean, I think actually I think Cynthia's is blurred, so but it looks like I see multiple windows behind her. So we're all at home, right? And we're all able to do our job, and it's all safe and secure, right? At that point. So, well, no, this is great, Nadim. Thank you very much for coming on. Sajid, Cynthia, any last questions for Nadim? Okay, great. Thanks everybody. We'll catch everybody next week.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Thank you, Nadim.
Thank you.